Silicon Valley is in chaos. Almost all of the major big tech companies are collapsing. For example, Meta was worth over $1 trillion in 2021, but just a year later, and their value has dropped by 2/3. And the other giant—
You've got to keep in mind that like it's not like Meta had $1 trillion. They didn't have $1 trillion. This was a valuation of the company.
I'm far behind. Amazon, Meta, Twitter, Tesla, Netflix have all seen massive revenue drops, and the scale of these losses is unprecedented, especially considering big tech has been so unstoppable for the last decade. In fact, revenues and profits were skyrocketing. Silicon Valley was a billionaire factory, with some of the most prolific billionaires building their names and their bank accounts on the back of big tech companies. Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, all of them were created by the massive tech boom of the last 4 decades. But then the bubble popped, and now the biggest names in Silicon Valley are seeing their revenue plummet, firing hundreds of thousands of employees, with the stock value of almost every big tech company.
I feel like also like a big factor with this too is that the economy has been going down. Like that's also the truth. Like it's the beginning of a recession, and people are getting laid off. Like in the last 10 years, we haven't had that happen. And also like, this is what happens with a lot of things, is that I think they just keep growing, expecting that they will continue growing, and then eventually they stop growing, and they have a bunch of people that they don't need.
Falling dramatically, which leads us to the question, how did it get this bad so quickly? Well, you see, tech was a growing part of the world's economy for years. Over the last decade, tech companies have only got larger and larger. And of course, there were ups and downs. For example, the dot-com crash of the late 90s proved the catastrophic consequences of overvaluing tech companies. However, over time, the industry always picked up again. It was a measured climb at first, but soon people forgot the mistakes of the past. And as the years rolled by and technology improved, the companies behind it grew richer and richer. But there were massive problems on the horizon for Silicon Valley, because the path wasn't all golden. For example, companies like Uber have coasted on their potential, hoovering up investments without a proper model for profitability. The same can be said for Twitter, and yet despite this, all of the giants of the industry grew to immense proportions on paper. For example, in 2018, Meta surpassed $500 billion in net worth, and Amazon were closing in on $1 trillion. But all of these companies had a similar problem. They just weren't worth what people thought they were.
Well, yeah, of course, because people don't know the power of these companies. And also, I think that another reason why these companies are losing value is probably because they're getting regulated more. So like these companies don't have as much unlimited control to just do whatever they want. So whenever you have the government making more decisions for these companies, it's going to be harder for people to say how much money the companies can make.
Business models were shaky and in constant need of investment, or they just didn't make that much money to begin with. Their margins were always incredibly tight, and that's why almost all of these tech billionaires never look at the stock price.
That whole period is very interesting because the stock is not the company, and the company is not the stock. And so as I watched the stock fall from 113 to 6, I was also watching all of our internal business metrics. Every single thing about the business was getting better and fast.
Because they believed as their technology spread into every aspect of the world, the companies would always ride the wave of future potential. Their shaky
You have to remember also, like a lot of people they treat trading and like stocks the same as people treat NFTs. Like, yes, obviously stocks are based on a real product that provides a value, but functionally for an average person, many people just treat them the exact same.
Business model just didn't appear to be an issue at this point. All these big tech companies were gaining more and more power, and it seemed like they were untouchable because big tech had something invaluable: the eyeballs and data of the entire world.
Oh, yeah.
You see, ever since they started pulling in user data at the massive levels they do now, social media companies were then further driven to maximize their engagement, keeping people on their app for as long as possible, and often as possible became the most important thing, which is why we're all so addicted to our phones and our laptops. It makes all of these big tech companies billions of dollars, allowing them to sell more and more ads and exploit more and more of your data. And over time—
Yeah, and I think over time also, like, there's been more laws against it. So every time that a country makes a law against holding people's data, this company's value goes like this. Because like now they had this thing and they don't have it anymore. Which is a good thing, by the way.
companies perfected this process by manipulating psychology, making the apps so addictive that the entire world couldn't live without their smartphone. And during this process, they found out that anger and fear are some of the best ways to keep people engaged. And so as the algorithms were fine-tuned for engagement, they pushed more extreme and more provocative posts above everything else, putting them in front of everyone's faces constantly, all while censoring any information that didn't fit into Silicon Valley's political narrative.
I think that's also another issue, and you're seeing a lot of pushback against that now, is that, you know, traditional mainstream narratives, so many people have been ostracized from like the larger like tech company websites like Twitter, etc., that there are enough of them that then they have their own secondary websites that they're using instead, like Rumble. You know, obviously I think Truth Social is pretty much fucking dead besides Donald Trump, you know, acolytes. But as you ban more and more people for having the wrong opinions, eventually you get to a point where the amount of people that you've banned is large enough that they can create their own ecosystem by themselves. And I think that's what's happened.
Which is why Twitter, Meta, and all these other companies became the breeding ground for social media addiction, censorship, and hatred. And as time went on, the cycle ramped up and the culture war worsened. And these changes in the online space were reflected in the real world, leading to riots, unrest, and collapse. It didn't matter to the tech companies though. In fact, this was in their interest. And instead of tackling the problems that they had caused themselves with their algorithms, companies started to then lean further on censorship, suppressing all counter opinions in the name of misinformation. But this solution wouldn't work forever. Tech companies were going to pay the cost for their meddling in public discourse. However, for now, they had to deal with a much more conventional problem: competition. Over the past decade, China has exploded into the technology industry. Companies like Tencent, Huawei, and ByteDance have been eating into the Western market share on a global scale. In fact, Tencent has made numerous takeovers of Western companies like Riot, Epic Games, and even Ubisoft.
Yeah, people don't know this. Riot Games is owned by China. League of Legends is owned by China.
And through these moves, they've undermined Western dominance in the lucrative gaming industry, with China owning some of the most popular games today like Fortnite and League of Legends. And China's also taking over with things like TikTok and Tencent's investments in Reddit and Discord. And then Huawei attacked hardware manufacturers, releasing cheaper alternatives loaded with Chinese data collection technology. Xiaomi did the same, but to even greater effect. Despite only being founded in 2010, they've gained over 12% of the market already.
Wow.
ByteDance is probably the most sinister. I mean, China was well aware of the disruptive powers of social media long before the West had any idea, and they studied what the Western companies were doing with engagement and turned it into an art form, with TikTok exploding in popularity by playing on Silicon Valley's addictive business model. And by learning from Silicon Valley's successes and mistakes, TikTok has grown by 400% every single year, seizing Western social media companies' audiences from under their noses.
I think that TikTok will usually, like a lot of there's always the new app that the kids use, and the only thing that you can be sure about is the new app will not be the old app. TikTok is still relatively new, but I would be surprised if TikTok held the same relevance in 10 years, because kids go from one platform to another because they don't want to go to the old platform because they want something new. I think that's what's happened over the years. It's like Vine, for example, yeah.
Which is why almost every major app has now adopted TikTok's short video model. And to put it plainly, this is a targeted attack on Silicon Valley. All these companies have incredibly close relationships with the CCP, which has given them enormous room to scale up. Because no matter how profitable these companies are, they've always got the Chinese government behind their back. And this gives them a massive advantage over the West. They don't have to deal with pesky human rights laws, ethical impediments, or even profitability. Instead, they can be saved from the knowledge that as long as they pull the party line, they can get away with virtually anything. And this isn't just within China, this is everywhere. They get government backing abroad, as all of these Chinese big social media sites are practically a third party of the Chinese government. And as they work in tandem, these companies have become an unstoppable force. And so whilst the Western tech companies are always at each other's throats, China's tech giants have been allowed to build their monopolies in peace. Which is why every day, China gains a little more ground on the West. Because for every user and customer that China gains, Silicon Valley gets weaker. And this new threat has been awful for big tech's bottom lines. And the true consequences have only just begun today.
Okay, alright, this is very
But before we continue, I want to tell you about the video sponsor Morning Brew. Morning Brew is a free daily newsletter delivered Monday to Sunday, getting you up to speed on business, finance, and tech in just 5 minutes. You see, before I subscribed to Morning Brew...
How is this different than Amazon and Google? I think that a foreign company that is beholden to the government, that has no recourse if the government asks to, use their files for different things, I think this is very different. But fundamentally, in a lot of ways, it's not. And I think that really with any type of social media, I've said this for years now, they need to be moderated and regulated. Everything that you use is regulated. The Amazon is regulated. That makes the website that you're using. The monitor that you're reading this off of is regulated in like 50 different ways. The fact that like Twitter and like these different platforms can just do whatever they want, I don't really think this has been for the good of the public.
I started my mornings aimlessly scrolling through my phone, watching mind-numbing content. But now with Morning Brew, I get a summary of relevant stories that are really informative. For example, I learned that Tesla stock prices have been tumbling after Tesla delivered less cars than was expected of the company, causing the company's devaluation to drop by 65% in 2022 alone.
Sense, right?
And Morning Brew highlighted that the reasons for this go much deeper than Musk's ownership of Twitter. Instead, they highlighted how the production at Tesla slowed down due to lockdowns in China, along with demand for electric cars cooling down and gas prices lowering, in addition to the market facing increased competition. And this is just to name a few reasons. And it's clear when you read over Morning Brew's articles that they are witty, relevant, and informative. A much better alternative to the dry, dense, and boring traditional news that so many of us are used to. And that's why there's absolutely no reason not to subscribe to Morning Brew if you're interested in business, finance, or tech news. It's completely free and takes less than 15 seconds to subscribe. So sign up for free by visiting morningbrewdaily.com/moon or by clicking the link in the description below.
I don't know if
These
that's
problems
good or
were
not.
still on the horizon, but they hadn't affected the numbers yet. Apps like TikTok were only just getting started and massive growth was still expected. And by the end of 2016, some journalists were hailing Silicon Valley as the future. They said this because something dramatic had changed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Whenever I read a new world order begins to arise, I mean, fuck, this doesn't necessarily fill me with a lot of, security, okay? It doesn't sound good.
The list of the top companies used to always be dominated by oil and manufacturing, and a few financial giants that relied on their sheer scale to dominate. But these companies have now been replaced by Google, Amazon, Tesla, Apple, and Microsoft, pushing out the old guard. However, despite their immense valuations, these companies still weren't nearly as profitable as they should have been. From 1995 to 2015, Amazon only made $2 billion in profit, despite the company approaching $1 trillion net worth. Now yes, this move was meant to dodge taxes, yet it still portrayed a significant disconnect between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world. Rather than focusing on profitability, Silicon Valley...
Well, no, that is like very small. Like, think about it. Usually companies, their valuation is 7x their annual income. Like somewhere between like 5 to 10x. So if you have a valuation of $1 trillion, let's say $800 billion, you would expect to be getting $8 billion to $12 billion a year.
Valley companies were much more focused on growth, and the best example of this is Uber. You see, Uber spent years focused entirely on growth above anything else. They embodied the Silicon Valley mantra, breaking laws in industries to cement themselves in the market. With a massive leak showing that Uber executives were shown instructing their employees to use chaos and violence to uproot the taxi industry and put pressure on governments. And of course, they had big problems with actually making enough money. I mean, their business model still has incredibly low margins, even after they started to squeeze every penny they could and raising all of their prices. Which has caused
I've never used Uber before, but I've heard that people that use it is very expensive. And the people that even drive around with Uber aren't making that much money either.
But to be in a worrying situation. With market saturation, their stock price is plummeting, and the company's dreams of market dominance are now fading into the ground. But Uber does still have a slight chance, as Silicon Valley overconfidence has led to way more destructive collapses, specifically in the case of WeWork. In early 2019, WeWork was seen as an innovative new company that was set to change the world of work. Okay. Although it was founded in New York, the Silicon Valley mentality had definitely gotten to its founder, Adam Neumann. The charismatic CEO was so good at convincing investors that he pulled in billions, and only a few years after its founding, the company had raised over $1 billion for their office space company.
Wow.
And I say office space company, but WeWork was still listed as a tech company. And so WeWork managed to raise over $1 billion for the company. And this was despite mass layoffs at the company and poor financial performance. Because simply enough, investors were just in love with the idea, rather than the product in front of them.
Oh, this is what happens. Like, again, it's not like the people that are investing in NFTs are any special kind of stupid. People did this in real life too. People invest in bullshit because it's like, oh, this is the thing that everybody gets into now, so we've got to invest into it. So yeah, big companies do this all the time. Like, yeah, FTX is a good example. Let's see, Theranos is another example. Those are the top two that come to mind right now.
In fact, WeWork lost over $2
Esports,
billion in
another
2018,
example.
and yet the hype continued. Analysis stated that the company was now worth over $40 billion. This was more than giants like Airbnb.
Wow.
And by September, the company attempted to gain even more investor money, beginning the process of an IPO or initial public offering. And this would open the shares of the company to the public, raising even further billions for WeWork. And yet even with this enormous amount of investment, the IPO started to gain scrutiny as investors started to see that the company was really making no money, and it portrayed the true reality of the Silicon Valley business model. Massive
That's the
debt.
thing is, if you make your company public like that, everybody can see all of your stuff. Like, that's what it means by having a public company. Except company could actually grow and you could get money out of it. NFTs are no value whatsoever. Yeah, but what I'm saying is that these people view them as the same. It's like they're not investing in these companies because they have value. They're investing in these companies because they want to be able to make money. Somehow I dropped my phone and I don't, like, it just fucking disappeared. I don't know where it went. Like, how do I drop my phone and now like, where the fuck did it go? Like, how do I drop my phone? Oh, there it is. It fell down and it rolled. It rolled around behind the Pepsi box and I couldn't see it. How the fuck does that even happen? Yeah, pull the fucking Elden Ring, yeah.
And low revenue propped up by other people's money. And so their $40 billion valuation was cut by 3/4 in a matter of days, resulting in 20% of the company being fired. And
yeah, because people finally realize that, you know, it's not real. It's not a big thing. It's not
Newman, their
actually
CEO, and other
there's no
executives
actual
were all
value.
forced to resign, and the company was forced to cut back on its massive growth plans. Reality hit the company hard, and today people are questioning the expiry date of WeWork. But yet again, Silicon Valley didn't learn from this example, despite the very same business practices being used across
Well, it's not that they didn't learn from the example, it's that they realized that investors didn't learn from the example. Because a lot of the people that are making these investment decisions are still not tech savvy enough to understand the scope that they're getting into. And this is even happening with like billion-dollar companies. Because like, look at that guy, Eddie Ibanez, for example. This guy was able to finesse billionaires into believing that he was legitimate with nothing else than saying, I'm in crypto and I make a lot of money with crypto. It's because people don't really understand it, but they want to make sure that they don't get left behind, so they pretend like they do.
Tons of tech companies, this was just seen as an isolated case by tech elites. Besides, now wasn't the time to consolidate and slow down. And then as 2019 came and went, the world was forced into the pandemic.
First U.S. case has been...
This is also like a really big point, is that social media grew exponentially during COVID, and now that COVID is over, you're naturally going to have a lot of people that are not going to be using social media as much because they're not home all day. So like, again, this is a natural thing. It has nothing to do with the company itself. It just has to do with things that happen in the world that the company is a part of.
detected. There's confirmation
Yeah,
the
pretty
coronavirus has reached Australia.
Nobody's
here
going to wear
that tech
masks
companies
again.
would double
Nobody gives a
down.
fuck.
COVID-19,
Even
as it
if
was
the
for
numbers
so
go
many
back
other
up.
billionaires and corporations, was a massive opportunity for big tech. The
Mm-hmm.
pandemic saw tech companies' values rise by hundreds of billions. They made so much money, they barely even knew what to do with it.
Oh,
and it was
yeah.
the belief at the top of these
And this was also with gaming companies too. Somebody asked, do you think this is going to happen with, we're starting to see this happen with esports. Like, how many of you guys have seen, these different esports companies where it's like 100 Thieves, I think TSM, I don't know about TSM, I don't quote me on that. But like multiple esports organizations have laid off a lot of people because esports has been put out as this like massive, huge emerging market, and they haven't really made any money with it. Like, the amount of money that they spend on it is more than the amount of money that they make from players. It's just that simple. And now more people are starting to realize that, so the value of esports is going down by a lot.
companies, that this is just
Yeah, it's
how
a money
things were. Tech dominance into the future seemed all but guaranteed. Zuckerberg and others would be risky and short-sighted in their investments, assuming that revenue levels would stay strong after the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why Meta's workforce grew by 28% in just a year, and Amazon massively expanded their own operations, seeing their profits soar by over 220%.
Yeah, it's like I would look at, if I was going to look at like how much have these companies grown or shrunk, I would look at like 2018 versus now, and like whenever they level off. because that's going to give you a better, and then adjust for inflation, obviously, because that's going to give you a much better indication of what this company's really doing. Because you had a massive global quarantine, a massive pandemic that affected the entire world. It's like nothing like this happened. Well, the last time it happened was like 100 years ago, and the whole world was way different 100 years ago. So like it's never really happened in the way that COVID happened. So you can't look at that growth and say this is sustainable. It even happened with streamers and YouTube content creators and stuff like that. It's like, think about how many people during COVID blew up and got super fucking popular, and now nobody really cares as much about them, right? They're still popular, but not proportionally as much as they were.
Apple spent an extra $90 billion just buying back their own stock during the pandemic, betting an amount worth more than the GDP of Sri Lanka on their continued success. You see, tech companies made massive investments into themselves, betting that the good times would never end. And it was this overconfidence that meant that when their profits finally did start to slow down, they wouldn't be able to cope with it. But overconfidence wasn't the only problem that worsened during the pandemic. You see, the culture war was getting more and more intense as people spent more time online. Unwinnable arguments raged as people's lives got measurably worse. And whilst the pandemic was lucrative for tech companies, they were some of the only winners, with lockdowns completely destroying the economy, putting millions out of jobs and businesses out of business. And
the pandemic was great for streaming. If you were a streamer, a world pandemic where a bunch of people are dying and they can't leave the house is a good thing for you. It's the same thing as these companies here. It's like Netflix. This is massively financially beneficial.
Impossible to measure the negative effects of the pandemic on people and their mental health. However, what was measurable was the heating up of the culture war. And eventually the result of this would be social media fatigue. People were just sick of the culture war, and China was now also closing in on Silicon Valley, as over the pandemic, TikTok...
I think also it's not that people were sick of the culture war, people were sick of only being able to have one perspective. And then if you had another perspective, you could get banned. Like, that's it. You would just get banned off of the platform for misinformation or anything like that. That's why people had problems with it. And it's like, I said it whenever it was happening, right? It's like, this is obviously not going to last, because eventually there's going to be enough people that are just like, fuck this, we're not going to deal with it. And then they just make a law and it doesn't exist anymore. That's just what happens. And it's already starting to happen now. You're seeing, obviously, Twitter got bought by Elon Musk. None of the problems that people had with Twitter exist anymore, and the platform has changed.
Grew by hundreds of millions of users, surpassing 1.1 billion in 2021. However, all of these combining factors hadn't affected big tech yet, but it would only be a matter of time. Meanwhile, the tech billionaires were enjoying their moments in the sun. Jeff Bezos spent millions on a personal space trip, whilst Elon Musk...
better. Oh, you're saying like Twitter is worse now? I think Twitter is pretty much about the same, if you want me to be totally honest. The only difference on Twitter is that now people are openly saying COVID was fake. My experience on Twitter actually hasn't changed. Like, I think that a lot of people that are saying like, oh, Twitter's way better, Twitter's way worse, the only people who Twitter is better for are people that are like conspiracy theorists because they're not getting banned. Everybody else, everything else, it seems like it's all the same.
Musk became
like it was better for people that wanted to express other viewpoints.
Person of the year for 2021, but all of this would turn out to be some of the last good news these tech billionaires had, as once the world finally opened up again, it signaled the end of Silicon Valley's boom, even if no one believed it. For example, at Meta, revenue growth had risen to over 50% in the summer of 2021, but it dropped sharply over the next 9 months, falling to just 5% by the first quarter of 2022. Amazon also saw a sharp decline, from over 40% to around 7% in the same time span. Even usually stable companies like Microsoft or Apple suffered the same fate, seeing their growth levels fall off. So what happened here? Well, all of the growing problems that Silicon Valley thought they could ignore were finally making their mark. And whilst they had been shielded from the pandemic recession by artificial demand, that was all over now, and the economy was only getting worse. So people began to spend much less on products. People didn't care about ads. Essentials became more expensive, so people had less disposable income. Services...
It's crazy how expensive shit is at the store. Like, I am astonished. Like, I'll go to, like, Wendy's or something like that, and a hamburger will be $5. How the fuck do people afford this? Yeah, eggs are so expensive. I don't really eat eggs, so I'm not sure. But, like, this is just nuts. How much is, like, if you live in the U.S., How much is like a dozen eggs? Or 2 dozen, like a thing of eggs? $200? Yeah, I don't think so. How much is your $2 steak? It's still about $2. Maybe it might be 2.5 or 3. God damn, $8? I'm actually going to check next time I go to the store. I'm curious about that. Holy shit.
A boost as well, as people made up for the lost time. And on top of this, the culture war had burned tons of people out as well, leading to less usage of social media. A Canadian survey found that less people were using Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter in 2022 than in 2020. And the only tech company that was spared from the decline was TikTok. Their growth was unimpeded, maybe because they're artificially propped up by the Chinese government. But it was clear for everyone in Silicon Valley that they were losing their audience's attention. And with this dramatic reduction
it's because TikTok does a better job of showing people content that they want to see. That's why. And it's a better content delivery mechanism than Facebook is. Straight up. That's why. It's winning because it's better.
Intention came dramatic cuts in their profits. And this is when the crack started to show. Tech companies have become so focused on growth that when it dried up, it hit them much harder than other industries. Over the course of 2022, tech companies lost more and more money, leading to their CEOs to make some erratic decisions. Musk took over as CEO of Twitter after years of negotiations and legal
yeah, and this is also important to keep in mind. Like, obviously, everybody talks about, like, Twitter having to fire a bunch of people, but Meta did the same thing. A lot of these social media companies are doing the same thing, and like tech companies. It's happening all over the place, like Netflix too, for example.
He started off by firing large parts of the workforce, leading to massive technical glitches and problems with the app. Things were going so badly that he was forced to resign from the company. Google had put much of their focus...
Well, he didn't wait, he was forced to resign. That's not really true. I mean, he said he put out a poll, and he didn't... He said he was looking for somebody to take over Twitter, but he hadn't found anybody, and he was only going to step down as CEO. And just so you guys know, like, CEO is not the person who really... They're the person who makes the company day-to-day, like, run, but they don't really have all the control. The control is either the board of directors or the ownership board. Those are the actual people in control. If they don't like the CEO, they just kick him out. That's it. They're gone.
And their new Stadia cloud console. But as with every other big tech company, 2022 also saw its demise, being forced to refund everyone who bought it without Google actually getting the products back. Additionally, Uber saw a sharp decline in their business, to ruthless competition, massive leaks, and higher prices. Meta stock value dropped by around 60%, with Tesla's dropping by 70%. So once 2022 was nearing its end, tech companies realized it wasn't going to get any better anytime soon. They needed to cut costs, which is why you started to see articles of these big tech companies firing tens of thousands of workers. Like with Microsoft firing over 1,000 employees, then Stripe, a growing startup, letting go of 14% of their workforce. Elon was forced to lay off nearly 4,000 people from Twitter, with Meta following shortly after, laying off a further 11,000 people. Amazon cut their numbers by 10,000, and all of this had happened in just over a month. Eventually, Amazon would double their numbers in December, as clearly they hadn't shrunk enough. And these weren't minimum wage employees either. They were both high-skilled and incredibly...
What's also you have to keep in mind with Amazon is that Amazon workers are competing with robots. Like, there will be a time where whenever you buy something from an Amazon warehouse, there will be one person probably that just makes sure that the box goes to one place or something like that. Maybe. But other than that, it's going to be completely automated. So it's like, you remember back in the day, whenever you go to the store, your mom would take you to the grocery store, and there'd be like, I don't know, 15 cashiers or 15 aisles open, and now you show up at the same time and there's 3 aisles open and there's like 15 different self-checkout stations. Well, guess what? The same thing's happening at every single other company. You know, jobs are being consolidated, they're being replaced by automation, they're being, stacked on top of each other. There are certain amounts of people that they didn't really need based off of different types of accounting practices, and like, okay, well, you don't really need 15 people, you only need 12. And so, like, what does that really mean? It means 3 people out of every store get fired. That's a lot of fucking people. So that's why Amazon is going to lose even more people, is because Amazon has physical labor. Are we good? Refresh? Okay, I just want to make sure that we're good. Yeah, and somebody says in chat, yes, I work for a manufacturing company for fulfillment center automation. Can confirm. Exactly. So yeah, this is just what's going to happen, is that Amazon employees, like, you've got to keep in mind, like, it's not a hard job to go to aisle 75, pick out a pair of shoes, and then put the shoes in a box, right? Like, this isn't something that takes a lot of brain power or thinking or decision making. You could program a robot to do that. And guess what? That's what they're doing.
Expensive employees, and in total over 1,000 tech companies fired over 150,000 workers. The Silicon Valley had made their bed with their risky investments and growth-focused ethos. The same companies that had fought over these workers in the talent wars, which was just a year or two ago, were now letting them go and incurring massive costs in the process. And it wasn't just going to cost them at the time either. These firing sprees represent a massive amount of people with incredibly valuable skills. A job board called Tech Jobs for Good has seen massive increases in skilled job seekers off of the back of these layoffs. People who have seen the fast life of big tech companies.
I would also say that Tech Jobs for Good being a board is probably not a very good benchmark, because I've never heard anybody use it before. I think that if you want to look at LinkedIn or something that's a much more mainstream job, job marketplace, would be a better use, because that could also just be endemic growth that company could have.
And now instead looking to make a difference, despite a small hit to their paychecks. And this is one of the ways in which the collapse of big tech will inadvertently benefit the world. But perhaps this is symptomatic of a much larger trend in our economy. As going into 2023, with the UN predicting we're going to be in a massive recession, it seems like Silicon Valley can only expect more and more suffering. The future looks grim. Ad buys are low, which has hurt all of the social media companies like Meta, and supply chain issues are now threatening hardware companies like Apple and Microsoft. Governments are also now souring on big tech, seeing their influence as destabilizing. Microsoft's $69 billion acquisition deal for Activision and Blizzard is being debated by monopoly watchdogs around the world. The FTC has already tried to block it. Meanwhile, the whole tech industry is waiting for another court verdict on recommendation algorithms. Google.
Oh, I think that's. Oh yeah, this is going to happen very soon too. This is the video that we had already watched. I think it was the Captain Sparkles video that we took a look at. Could very well just be a bubble. Market will recover. I think that what's going to happen is that social media will cease to be global, which is a very sad thing. I find it to be probably one of the most culturally empowering and culturally progressive things that we have global social media. That you can actually talk to somebody that lives in Saudi Arabia. Now, they're probably using a VPN to get on there. However, you can talk to them, and you can actually hear from these other people in a completely different world, a real person that doesn't have a vested interest. They don't have a global agenda. It's like, how was your day? I think that goes so far in making people less xenophobic, less racist, and in general, be able to understand each other better. I think it's huge.
Is being sued for recommending videos made by terrorists, which then incited an attack in France. And if they're found liable, this will upend years of legal doctrine stating that digital platforms aren't responsible for what people post. The results of the case will dictate what's allowed for years to come and will possibly cripple companies like Google and Meta. It is very clear to everyone.
Oh, and I think that there will be a case too where eventually somebody will ask the question, why are minors on social media websites? There is no benefit for society that a minor is able to use a social media platform. There's really none. And I can almost fucking guarantee you that if this goes to be a big social issue, the companies will lose. Because any parents don't care. Parents massively fucking care. Every parent that has a kid has some sort of issue with this kid and social media almost. I hear this all the time, man. Zero benefit to anyone if you use social media? I think that you can make that argument, but any argument that you can make with that becomes infinitely more powerful whenever it's with kids. So it's like they're first going to get rid of kids off social media, and then maybe you can talk about what you're saying. And so bad parents don't? Yeah, for sure. How else are they going to get them indoctrinated? Well, I think that the problem is that big tech isn't really beholden to the government, really. So the indoctrination that big tech might be doing isn't the one the government wants them to have. Especially whenever it's by TikTok, which is made by China. Parents care, they just don't know how, or are too lazy or monitor or stop them. Exactly, for sure. And I think that's probably something that will be coming up relatively soon. Like, I cannot see a benefit for a 15-year-old girl to have an Instagram account. I can see, like, oh yeah, she can, have an Instagram with her friends. Like, yeah, there's probably like benefits, but I feel like you can look at some benefits, but like the net, you take all the benefits, weigh it against all the negatives, fucking like massively like double-digit negative effects. Awful. So yeah, it's really, really bad. And I think that as soon as the population starts seeing this and people's awareness of this grows, it's going to be done. Who cares? You can never stop them. Well, if who cares, you can never stop them is the answer you want to go with, why is it that there's already a rule for having kids that are 13 or over? Like, if you say that you're a little kid on a lot of these websites, the websites are programmed and compelled by law to automatically ban your account. You're right that, of course, there's going to be there's going to be kids that still use them. Absolutely. But, like, for example, with social media platforms where people post photos of themselves and you see a photo of a 14-year-old and they're going to ban you. That's what's going to happen. So, of course, I mean, like, yeah, they ban you. Exactly. So, just because, like, for example, whenever they made murder against the law, it didn't get rid of murder, but it probably made less people kill each other, It's the same thing with a lot of other stuff. Yeah, if you make something against the law, you at least have accountability for whenever you allow it to happen. Somebody else allows it to happen. It's about
in the tech world, that 2023 is going to be the true test for these tech giants. And so far, only a week into the year, and Amazon is already shedding 18,000 more jobs, with more cuts expected in the next few months. It should be clear by now that it's going to be a very rough year for Silicon Valley, and only time will tell whether they're ever going to be the giants they once were.
I think that it's a very interesting time that we're going into. And I think also, like, especially after COVID and the two recent elections, right? The 2020 and 2016, every single person that's politically minded has seen the power of social media. They saw how powerful, the Donald Trump social media machine was in 2016. I think that if there was no social media, Donald Trump probably wouldn't have won. But he was massively popular on social media across the board. And then on the other side, people saw how powerful social media was for controlling a narrative with COVID, for controlling a narrative with like the election, for example. I mean, I'm not one of these election denier people, but the fact that you can't even say that is a little bit ridiculous to me. And of course, all the people on the other side are like, well, what the fuck is this? We want to be able to say what we want to say, and they can't do that. So now both sides have had they've had a dosage and an experience of what it's like whenever social media is against you. Yeah, 9/11 deniers, plenty of stuff, yeah. All the big tech businesses are not going to die. I don't think that they're going to die, but I think that there's going to be a massive restructuring of big tech. And I can't imagine big tech existing on the global level that it does now in 10 years because of regulation and different parts of like government mandated oversight that I think is going to happen. That's why. Let's see here. I'll read a few comments and then we'll move everything else over. And when you censor ideas and only make them more radical, sometimes, but it depends on what ideas you're censoring. I think some ideas it's probably a good idea to censor them. Some ideas it's not. My perspective is in general, if your idea is to kill a bunch of people, this is bad. If it's not, it's probably a lot more debatable. I think usually ideas that advocate violence towards certain people or certain groups of people are like categorically bad. And everything else, it's not really that big of a deal to me. Think some company will come up along soon that will slay the giants? Maybe, and I think that it'll just be the government. Regulation will always struggle to keep up with tech unless it becomes much more agile. I think that it will be, and I think also there are some general sentiments that these tech companies have that, like for example, like their algorithms and like allowing kids on the website. That's not something that you have to like really fix more than once. Maybe it might have to be with the algorithms at least. I'm not sure. What about ideas that advocate violence in general and isn't aimed at a certain demographic, like toppling governments? Well, I don't know. Like, for example, like, like saying that you should go and burn down your local courthouse. Yeah, I think that, like, basically, my perspective in general with, like, social media is I very strongly believe in personal censorship. And what I mean by that is that if you don't like cats, you should be able to blacklist the word cat on Twitter, and you should never have to see another cat in your life. Nobody should have the right to force you to see a cat. But at the same time, I think a person who wants to share their love of cats should not get banned from the website because of that. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I very much believe in that. Absolutely. Don't be feline phobic. Yeah, there you go. And black metal was built over burning churches. Imagine how cool music based on building legal institutions would be. Black metal was built off of burning churches. I think that you're really talking about a very small subset of black metal. That's like the Burzum, Euronymous, like that group of people. To say that black metal as a whole was built around burning churches, I think is probably a bit too much. Yeah, that's like, Norwegian stuff. There's not that many people that are really doing that. It's bullshit about black metal, yeah. Let's see here. And problem is the on the line is stating facts and opinions. Well, I think people should be able to have wrong opinions about things. I don't think that should be bannable unless it's something that's advocating violence. Basically, things that should be bannable should be against the law. That's in general where I draw the line. Isn't it dangerous as you get close to your bubble and you're exposed only to what you want to be exposed? Yes, it does. I think echo chambers are bad, but I think people have the right to be in them. Like, for example, drinking soda is bad, but I think people have the right to drink soda. Drinking alcohol is bad, but I think people have the right to drink alcohol. Like watching TV has no real probable benefit, right? But people have the right. Like, for example, being overweight is bad, but it's not illegal to be overweight. Some people can indulge in negative things, and you can't control people on that level. Drinking soda makes you bald. Yeah, I heard that one got deleted. But yeah, I think this is a good video, and I hope that we see more people talking about this kind of stuff, because I'd be really happy to see like more forward thinking with social media and people talking about it. I think that too often the conversations around social media are just people that are trying to co-opt it to push their own narratives rather than make it better. Let's see here. I'll read a couple more things and then I want to move on to something else. And wouldn't it be better for people to know that it's bad even if they choose to continue to do it anyway? Well, I think it's okay for people that... So, like, for example, if somebody says that, I don't know, like that 9/11 didn't happen or something like that, I think that everybody else is going to say, like, shut up, idiot. Yeah, it did. Like, we watched it happen. Go over there and see for yourself. Or the earth is flat. No, it fucking isn't. Shut up, idiot. Go on a spaceship and see for yourself. Look at all of the data that, like, Pythagoras fucking found in, BC 5,000 years ago. So, yeah, of course. Of course it's better, but I think that discourse is almost always better than censorship. Except in cases of advocating violence and a few other exceptions.